The night was colder than usual. The wind pushed against the wooden walls of the small cabin, howling like a beast lost in the forest. Inside, Daniel sat near the fire, rubbing his tired hands together. He had been living alone at the edge of the colony for months now, fixing machines and surviving in silence. He was used to loneliness, or at least he thought so. But that night, something broke the silence. At first, Daniel thought it was the wind. A low scratching sound, almost like claws against wood, came from the door. His hand froze. He turned his head slowly. The fire cracked behind him, but the noise did not stop. Scratch, scratch. Then a faint whimper followed, soft and shaky, like something small and frightened. Daniel stood up carefully. His boots touched the wooden floor, echoing in the stillness. He reached for the old iron rod he kept near the fire, just in case. The colony was surrounded by forests, and in those forests lived creatures no human wanted to face alone. He approached the door. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, thump. Something weak leaned against the door. His heart beat faster. Slowly, he unlatched it and pulled the heavy door open. What he saw froze him in place. A small figure lay curled up right on his doorstep. A girl, but not a human girl. Her ears were long, furred, sharp at the tips like a wolf's. Her hair was dark and messy, sticking to her face from the rain. Her skin was pale, marked with scratches, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. She was trembling, her breath white in the freezing air. Her tail, bushy and soaked, curled around her legs. Daniel's grip on the iron rod loosened. This was no beast. This was a child. An alien Wolfgirl, no more than 12 or 13 by human guess. And she had fallen asleep against his door, as if this was the only safe place left in the world. For a long moment, he simply stood there. The rain poured harder, sliding down his coat. The girl stirred, her ears twitching. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly golden in the firelight spilling from inside the cabin. She looked at him, not with anger, not with threat, but with fear. She made a weak sound in her throat, half growl, half whimper, and tried to press herself tighter against the wooden frame of the door. Daniel knelt down, his rod now resting on the floor. He spoke softly. Easy. I won't hurt you. Of course, she probably didn't understand his words. Aliens from this sector rarely spoke human tongue, but maybe she could feel the tone in his voice. His voice was calm, gentle, different from whatever she had run from. Her golden eyes blinked, then half closed again. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't eaten or slept in days. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct told him this was dangerous. Bringing an alien inside could mean trouble, big trouble. Some colonies had strict rules about harboring outsiders. If anyone found out, he could lose everything. But how could he leave her out here? The wind cut through the trees, howling louder than before. The girl shivered hard, her thin clothes doing nothing against the cold. She whimpered again, this time softer, almost like a plea. Daniel sighed. All right, come on. Carefully, he bent down and slid his arms under her small frame. She was lighter than he expected, but her body was ice cold. As he lifted her, her head rested weakly against his chest, and for a brief moment, he felt her heartbeat, fast, scared, but alive. He carried her inside. The warmth of the fire filled the cabin, and the smell of burning wood pushed away the dampness of the rain. Daniel laid her gently on a blanket near the fire. Her tail twitched once, then stilled. She didn't open her eyes again. She had already drifted back into a deep, exhausted sleep. Daniel sat back, staring at her. The flickering flames painted her face in soft orange light. She looked fragile, but there was something wild in her, even as she slept. Those wolf ears, that tail, and the faint growl that escaped her when she shivered. Who was she? Why had she come to his door? Questions swirled in his head, but no answers came. He only knew one thing. She wasn't safe out there. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Leaning back against the wall, Daniel rubbed his face and muttered, "What have you gotten yourself into, old man?" The Wolfgirl stirred in her sleep, curling closer to the fire, and for the first time in months, Daniel realized he wasn't alone anymore. But deep in his chest, unease grew. Because things that show up at your door in the middle of the night, they always come with a story. And stories like that never end simple. Morning light spilled into the cabin through the cracks in the old shutters. Daniel blinked awake, the fire now nothing more than glowing embers. For a moment he thought he had dreamed the whole thing, but then he heard it. Soft breathing. He turned his head. The Wolfgirl was still there, curled on the blanket. Her furred ears twitched slightly with each breath, her tail resting against the wooden floor. She looked peaceful in sleep, though her face was still pale, her lips dry. Daniel sat up slowly. What am I doing? He thought. He had taken in an alien child without knowing anything about her. If the colony guards found out, they would ask questions he couldn't answer. Why was she here? Where had she come from? He sighed and stood. Quietly he prepared some food, a simple meal of bread and dried meat. The smell filled the small room. That was when her golden eyes opened. She looked straight at him. For a moment, neither moved. Her gaze was sharp, animal-like, yet full of fear. She sniffed the air, her ears flicking as if testing the safety of this strange place. Then, slowly, she sat up. Her small hands trembled as she hugged her knees to her chest. Daniel noticed scars across her arms. Not the kind from accidents, but from fights. Something, or someone, had hurt her. He placed a piece of bread near her. "Here," he said gently. The Wolfgirl hesitated, eyes darting between the food and him. Then, in one quick motion, she snatched the bread and bit into it. She ate like someone who hadn't tasted food in days. Daniel watched in silence, not wanting to scare her off. When she finished, she stared at him again as if waiting for his next move. He pointed to himself. "Daniel," he said slowly. Then he pointed at her. "You?" She tilted her head, ears twitching. No answer. Only silence. He tried again, repeating his name. This time she growled softly, not in anger but as if struggling to form words. Then she looked down and pressed her tail tightly around herself. Daniel realized she might not speak his language at all, or maybe she couldn't speak anymore. He let it go for now. By noon, the rain had stopped. Daniel stepped outside to gather water. The forest smelled fresh after the storm, alive with dripping leaves and the sound of distant birds. But when he turned back toward the cabin, he stopped in surprise. The Wolfgirl stood at the doorway, watching him. Her bare feet touched the wet ground, her hair clinging to her face. The moment he moved further, she stepped forward too, her eyes locked on him. It was almost like she was afraid to let him out of her sight. He raised an eyebrow. "You're following me?" Of course, she didn't answer. But when he walked toward the well, she trailed behind. Always a few steps back, but always there. Daniel filled his jug with water, pretending not to notice. When he turned suddenly, she froze, golden eyes wide, like a cornered animal. But she didn't run. She stayed. The rest of the day passed the same way. No matter where he went, chopping wood, checking the fences, fixing a loose board, she was always there, silent, watching, following. At first, it made him uneasy. He wasn't used to company. But slowly, he began to understand. She had chosen him, for some reason he didn't know. Maybe because he had opened the door. Maybe because he hadn't pushed her away. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Daniel returned to the cabin. The Wolfgirl followed as always, When he sat near the fire, she sat too, curling up across from him. Her ears twitched at every crack of the burning wood, her tail slowly moving side to side. It felt strange, almost like having a shadow. Later, that night, when Daniel lay down to rest, he expected her to keep her distance. Instead, when he closed his eyes, he heard soft footsteps. He opened them to see her lying near the door again. Her small body curled tightly against the wooden frame, as if guarding it. Daniel frowned. Why the door? Why not near the fire where it was warm? He didn't ask. Maybe the door meant safety to her. Maybe it reminded her of last night, when she had been found there and taken inside. As the hours passed, Daniel couldn't sleep. His mind was restless. Who was she really? Why had she come here? He looked at her once more. The Wolfgirl slept, soundly, her chest rising and falling in rhythm, her ears twitching as if listening to dreams only she could hear. And then it hit him. She wasn't just staying for food or warmth. She had decided something, chosen something. She had chosen him. The realization unsettled him, because whatever this girl carried, whatever past she had run from, it was now at his door too, and she wasn't planning to leave. Not tomorrow, not ever. The days that followed were unlike anything Daniel had expected. Every morning when he opened his eyes, the Wolfgirl was already awake. Sometimes she sat quietly by the fire, staring at the flames as though lost in another world. Other times, she was at the door watching the forest with sharp golden eyes, her ears twitching at every sound, and always, she followed him. At first, Daniel thought it was just fear. She had nowhere else to go, so she clung to the only person who had given her food and shelter. But the more time passed, the more he realized it was more than that. It wasn't just survival. It was something deeper. One morning, Daniel went to chop wood behind the cabin. He swung his axe, the crack of wood echoing through the trees. When he stopped to catch his breath, he noticed her, standing a few steps away, her tail still, her eyes fixed on him. "Don't you get tired of following me?" he asked with a tired smile. Of course, no answer came. But then she surprised him. She bent down, picked up a small broken branch, and struck it against a rock. Not with strength, but with rhythm. Crack, crack. Then she looked at him, almost like she was copying his work. Daniel froze. It was the first time she had done something other than watch. A laugh escaped his lips. "So, you're trying to help?" The Wolfgirl tilted her head, ears twitching. She didn't smile. She rarely did. But there was something in her eyes, something curious. From that day, Daniel noticed more changes. When he fished at the stream, she crouched near him, dipping her hands into the water, copying his movements. When he repaired a broken hinge on the cabin door, she touched the tools carefully, studying them like they were strange treasures. It was like watching a wild creature learning the ways of a new world. But sometimes, her wild side returned in sharp, frightening ways. One evening, as they ate by the fire, Daniel stretched out his hand to pass her another piece of food. Suddenly she stiffened. Her ears flattened, her tail bristled, and a deep growl rumbled from her throat. Daniel pulled his hand back instantly. Her golden eyes flashed with something primal. Fear, anger, instinct all mixed together. Then, just as quickly, the growl faded. She lowered her head, clutching the food tightly in both hands, trembling as though ashamed of herself. Daniel watched her carefully. He could feel it. She wasn't just an ordinary child. She carried something heavy inside her, something dangerous. Yet, she hadn't run from him. That night, as she curled up by the door again, Daniel sat near the fire, lost in thought. "You're fighting something, aren't you?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. "Whatever it is. It scares you more than it scares me." The Wolfgirl shifted in her sleep, her ears twitching. For a moment, her lips moved as though she were speaking in a language too soft for him to hear. The bond between them grew quietly, not with words, but with gestures. She brought him small gifts from the forest, a shiny stone, a wildflower, once even a feather longer than her arm. She placed them near his chair, then backed away quickly, avoiding his eyes. Daniel never made a big deal of it. He simply said, "Thank you," and placed the item on the shelf. But he could see how her ears lifted slightly each time, how her tail flicked just once, betraying a small spark of joy. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. Daniel was repairing the fence near the edge of the woods when he slipped, cutting his hand on a nail. Blood dripped down his fingers. He hissed in pain and tried to wrap the wound with cloth, but before he could, the Wolfgirl was there. Her eyes widened at the sight of blood. She made a low sound, almost like a whine, and reached for his hand. Daniel hesitated but let her. She pressed her small palms gently against the cut, her claws barely touching his skin. Then, to his shock, she bent down and licked the wound once, quick and instinctive, before pulling back with a startled look, as if she had broken some unspoken rule. Daniel blinked at her. She looked away, ears flat, tail tight around her legs. Slowly, he chuckled. "Guess that's your way of helping, huh?" She didn't respond, but her golden eyes lifted for a second, and in them Daniel saw something new, not just fear, not just survival. Trust. That night, as they sat near the fire, Daniel realized something dangerous. He was starting to care. This wasn't just about keeping her alive anymore. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to understand her. But a question haunted him. If she trusted him this much, then who had broken that trust before? As the flames flickered, the Wolfgirl lay down, her head resting on her arms. Daniel watched her, and deep inside he knew the truth. They were no longer strangers. Something invisible tied them together now. A strange bond. Fragile, unspoken, but unbreakable. And whatever hunted her out there in the dark forests would soon be hunting him too. The forest was quiet that night, almost too quiet. The insects that usually sang under the moon were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Daniel sat near the fire inside his cabin, sharpening a small knife. Across from him, the Wolfgirl sat curled up, hugging her knees as the flames danced in her golden eyes. She hadn't moved much all day, not even to follow him outside. Something weighed heavy on her, Daniel noticed. He had begun to recognize her moods, even when she said nothing. Her ears told stories. When they perked, she was curious. When they twitched, she was listening. But tonight they were pressed flat against her head. Fear. He set the knife aside and leaned forward. "What is it?" he asked softly. "What are you hiding in there?" The Wolfgirl didn't reply. She stared into the fire, her face pale in the flickering light. For a moment, Daniel thought she would stay silent, as always. But then, she looked at him. It wasn't just a glance. It was a long, steady stare. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Daniel felt like she was letting him see something. What he saw made his chest tighten. Her eyes weren't just the eyes of a child. Behind them was something deeper, a story untold, a pain too heavy for her small body to carry. And in that silence, Daniel realized, this girl had seen things no child should see. His voice lowered. "Who hurt you?" She flinched. Not from the sound, but from the meaning. Her claws dug into her own skin and her tail coiled tightly around her legs. She shook her head as if denying it, or refusing to relive it. Daniel sighed and rubbed his face. He had no right to push her. But the weight of that stare stayed with him. Later, when he lay in bed, he noticed something strange. The Wolfgirl didn't curl at the door this time. She stood by the window, her small frame stiff against the pale moonlight. Her ears twitched, her nose lifted, sniffing the air. Daniel whispered, "You're watching for something, aren't you?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke. She wasn't just hiding, she was waiting. For what? Or for who? The next morning, Daniel woke early. He stepped outside to fetch water, but the moment he turned, he froze. The Wolfgirl was standing behind him again, but this time her expression was different. Her eyes scanned the tree line, sharp, alert, like a hunter sensing danger. Then she looked at him with urgency, as if trying to warn him. "Is someone out there?" Daniel asked. She growled softly, low in her throat. Not at him, at the forest, for the rest of the day she didn't leave his side, not even for a second. Every sound made her ears twitch, every shadow made her tail stiffen. Daniel could feel her tension, and it infected him too. That evening, as the sun dropped and the cabin filled with firelight, she finally did something she had never done before. She reached out. Her small clawed hand touched his wrist. Daniel blinked, surprised. Her eyes met his again, burning gold. And then she opened her mouth. Her voice was hoarse, broken, but the word was clear enough to send chills down his spine. "Run." Daniel's breath caught. She could speak. Not much, maybe, but she could, and that single word told him more than 1,000 sentences could. Something was coming. She pulled back quickly as if ashamed of showing too much, and curled up again by the fire, but her eyes stayed on him, sharp and filled with warning. Daniel sat in silence, the knife heavy in his hand. He didn't know who she was running from or why she had chosen his cabin as her refuge, but one thing was certain now. The secret in her eyes was not just pain, it was a story of pursuit, a story of enemies, a story that had now reached his doorstep. As the fire dimmed, Daniel felt the weight of her stare again. She was small, fragile, but inside those eyes was a storm, and whatever hunted her was getting closer. For the first time in years, Daniel felt fear not for himself, but for someone else. The Wolfgirl had given him her secret, not in words, but in her eyes. And now, he knew, his quiet life was over. The forest was uneasy that night. Daniel felt it even before the first sound reached his ears. The usual calm of the trees was gone. The birds had vanished. The air itself seemed heavier. The Wolfgirl sensed it first. She stood by the door, ears stiff, tail bristling. Her nose twitched as she sniffed the air. Then she growled, low and sharp. Daniel gripped his old iron rod, his heart beating faster. He had heard her growl before, but never like this. This was not fear, this was warning. "What is it?" he whispered. She turned her golden eyes toward him, and in them he saw the answer before he heard the sound. Voices. From deep in the trees came harsh, guttural calls. Not human. Alien. Words. Daniel couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. Hunters were near. The Wolfgirl pressed her back against the wall, trembling. Daniel crouched beside her. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Her silence was all the answer he needed. Moments later, shadows moved between the trees. 3 figures stepped out, tall and armed. Their armor glinted faintly in the moonlight, sharp blades at their sides. Their faces were partly hidden by masks, but Daniel caught sight of their eyes. Cold, merciless. They spoke again, their language harsh and sharp like knives scraping metal. One of them held a strange device glowing faintly. It beeped, pointing toward the cabin. Daniel's breath caught. They knew. The Wolfgirl's claws dug into his sleeve. Her entire body shook as she whispered in a broken, raspy voice. "No, no." Daniel tightened his grip on the rod. He was just one man with no training, no weapons, no plan. But he looked at the girl clinging to him, and he knew what choice he had. He wasn't going to hand her over. The 3 aliens moved closer. Their boots crushed the wet earth, their blades catching firelight from the cabin window. One shouted something, a demand, a command. They wanted her. Daniel stood. "You're not getting her," he said, though he knew they couldn't understand. Thigh. Wolfgirl's golden eyes widened. She tugged at his sleeve, urging him to run, to hide. But Daniel planted his feet firmly. He couldn't run. Not anymore. The first alien stepped forward, raising his blade. Daniel raised his rod in return. The tension hung in the air like a stretched bowstring. Then, everything exploded into motion. The alien lunged. Daniel swung his rod with all his strength. Metal clashed against iron, sparks flying. The shock rattled his bones, but he didn't fall. He pushed back, forcing the alien a step away. The Wolfgirl cried out a sharp, wild sound, and in that moment, Daniel saw her instincts break free. Her small body leapt forward, her claws flashing. She slashed at the alien's arm, leaving red marks across his armor. The alien roared and swung at her, but she darted away with animal speed. Daniel felt adrenaline burn through him. He struck again, this time aiming for the second alien's head. The rod cracked against the mask, sending the figure stumbling, but the third raised the glowing device, pointing it at the Wolfgirl. It hummed, charging with deadly energy. "No," Daniel shouted. He threw himself in front of her. The blast fired, hitting the wall behind them with a burning hiss. Smoke filled the cabin, the smell of scorched wood filling the air. The Wolfgirl grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back door. "Run!" she managed to say again, her voice raw but urgent. Daniel didn't argue this time. He kicked the back door open, and together they bolted into the forest. The cold air cut their skin, branches snapping under their feet. Behind them, the aliens shouted, their footsteps heavy as they gave chase. Daniel's lungs burned, but he didn't stop. The Wolfgirl ran beside him faster than he thought possible. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the dark, guiding him through the maze of trees. They leapt over fallen logs, pushed through thick bushes, their breaths ragged. Behind them, flashes of light tore through the night as the hunters fired their weapons. One shot struck a tree near Daniel's head, exploding bark into his face. He stumbled, but the Wolfgirl grabbed his hand and pulled. For someone so small, her grip was fierce, unyielding. At last, they dove into a hollow space under a cluster of rocks. The Wolfgirl shoved Daniel inside first, then squeezed in after him. They pressed against the cold stone, their breaths loud in the silence. The hunters' voices grew closer. Heavy boots stomped past, weapons humming. For a long, terrifying moment, Daniel thought they would be found. But then, the footsteps faded. The voices drifted away. Silence. Daniel leaned back against the stone, his chest heaving. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with dirt and blood. Beside him, the Wolfgirl trembled, her ears flat, her golden eyes wide. He looked at her. "They're not going to stop, are they?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Daniel reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Daniel saw more than fear. He saw guilt. Whatever secret she carried, it had brought death to his door. And yet, as he sat there in the dark, one thought filled his mind. He would rather die running with her than live knowing he gave her away. The forest was endless. Daniel's legs ached, his chest burned, and his breath came in heavy gasps. Yet still he ran. The Wolfgirl pulled him forward with surprising strength, her small hand locked around his wrist. She moved like she belonged to the wild, darting, between trees, slipping through shadows, never slowing down. Behind them, faint shouts echoed through the night. The hunters were still searching. Their strange weapons flashed from time to time, bursts of light tearing through branches, scorching the ground where Daniel had stepped only moments before. "Keep going," he whispered, though his voice shook. "Sorry." Wolfgirl didn't speak. She only glanced back at him with sharp golden eyes, her ears twitching at every sound. She was scared, but more than that, she was determined. At last, when the voices faded to the distance, she led him to a small cave hidden behind thick roots. They slipped inside, their bodies pressed against cold stone. For several minutes, they said nothing, only listening. The night was still dangerous, but for the moment they had escaped. Daniel slumped against the wall, gasping. His arms and legs trembled with exhaustion. He wasn't young anymore, and his body reminded him of it with every breath. The wolf girl crouched nearby, alert, watching the entrance of the cave like a silent guardian. He studied her in the dim light. Mud streaked her face, her hair tangled, her thin clothes torn from running. Yet she stood tall, tail raised, ears sharp. She looked like a child, and at the same time like a survivor. "You saved me back there," Daniel said quietly. Her eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. She hugged her knees again but said nothing. He chuckled softly. "Guess we're in this together now." For a long moment, she stayed silent. Then she surprised him. Her voice, low and broken, filled the cave. "Together." Daniel blinked. It was only one word, but it was enough to make his chest tighten. She was learning, she was trying, and most of all, she had chosen him again and again. The hours passed slowly. The cold seeped into the cave and Daniel's eyelids grew heavy, but he couldn't rest. The thought of the hunters finding them kept him awake. Each sound outside, a snapping branch, a shifting leaf, made him tense. The wolf girl, however, didn't rest at all. She stood near the entrance, sniffing the air, ears twitching. When Daniel's head drooped, she patted over quietly and placed her hand on his shoulder. He looked up into her eyes. She didn't speak, but her meaning was clear. Stay strong. Dawn. The voices of the hunters had grown distant. It was time to move again. The wolf girl led him deeper into the wilderness. The land was rough, filled with sharp rocks and steep climbs. Daniel's body complained at every step, but she moved with ease, helping him whenever he stumbled. When they crossed a river, she was the first to leap across the stones, then turned back, reaching out her hand. He took it, and her grip steadied him. As the sun rose higher, Daniel realized something he hadn't before. She wasn't just following him anymore. She was guiding him, protecting him. By afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke rose in the far distance from the hunters' camp. Daniel cursed under his breath. "They're not stopping." The wolf girl's ears pressed flat. She growled softly, but there was fear in her eyes. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a way." She looked at him, studying his face for a long moment. Then, for the first time, her lips curved slightly. Not a full smile, but something close. A silent promise that she believed in him. They moved again, sticking to the high ridges where the hunters' machines couldn't easily follow. The forest grew thicker, shadows deeper. At one point, they came across the tracks of a large beast. Claws bigger than Daniel's hand sunk deep into the mud. Daniel froze, but the wolf girl knelt down, sniffing the prints. Her eyes narrowed. Then she motioned for him to follow, her movements confident. "You know this place, don't you?" Daniel whispered. She didn't answer, but the way she moved told him everything. This was her world. The hunters might be dangerous, but here, she had an advantage. That night, they found shelter in a hollow tree. Daniel leaned against the inside, weary. The wolf girl sat close, her tail brushing his leg. She glanced at him once, then closed her eyes. As the fireflies lit the forest outside, Daniel realized how far they had come. A week ago, he had been alone, living a quiet life. Now, he was on the run with a strange alien child, a child who trusted him with her life. He looked down at her sleeping form. "I don't know who you are," he whispered, "but I'll keep you safe." Her ears twitched, though she didn't wake. Outside, the forest whispered with unseen dangers. But inside the hollow tree, Daniel felt something unexpected. Not just fear, not just exhaustion. Hope. They were running together now, and together, they might just survive. The rain returned on the third night. It came quietly, like a soft whisper across the leaves, then grew stronger, soaking the forest in cold mist. Inside the hollow tree, Daniel shivered. His coat was damp, his body sore from days of running. He leaned against the bark, trying to rest, But he didn't sleep. The wolf girl lay close beside him, curled tight for warmth. Her tail covered her feet. Her head rested against his arm. Even in sleep, her fingers lightly gripped his sleeve. She hadn't let go of him since the attack. Daniel looked down at her small form. She had barely spoken more than a few words, but she had said everything. Through her eyes, her growls, her actions, she had fought for him, protected him, guided him. He had never asked for her, but now he couldn't imagine leaving her. As dawn broke, gray light spilled through the cracks in the wood. Daniel gently shook her shoulder. Time to move. She opened her golden eyes slowly, blinking at the light. Then she sat up and looked outside. Her ears twitched, listening. She sniffed the air. Finally, she nodded. They moved again, climbing, hiding, watching. But Daniel was getting slower. The wound on his side, from the near miss of an energy blast, wasn't healing well. The cold made it worse. Every step sent pain through his body. The wolf girl noticed. She stopped walking. He waved a hand, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Let's keep going." But she didn't move. Instead, she dropped her small bag and walked to him. Gently, she touched his side. Her eyes filled with worry. Daniel groaned. "We can't stop now. They're still out there." The wolf girl looked around. Then she took his hand and pulled him toward a different path, deeper into the forest, into a place where the trees grew thicker and the ground grew soft. They reached a quiet glade, shielded by tall rocks and vines. A stream flowed nearby, and birds sang again, and the first time they'd heard birds in days. The wolf girl helped him sit down, then left without a word. Daniel waited, confused and weak. Minutes later, she returned, carrying strange blue leaves and pieces of bark. She crushed them with a rock, mixing them with water from the stream, creating a paste. Then, carefully, she pressed the mixture against his wound. Daniel winced but didn't stop her. Her hands were steady, her face focused. "You've done this before," he whispered. She looked up at him, not with fear, but calm. Then she did something he didn't expect. She pointed to herself and said, "Rava." Daniel blinked. "Your name?" She nodded. "Rava." He repeated the word softly. "That's beautiful." A small smile touched her lips. It vanished quickly, but it was there. From that moment, something changed. Rava stopped being the wolf girl. She was no longer just a mystery. She was Rava, someone with a name, a past, and now, a bond. For the next 2 days, they stayed hidden. Rava hunted small animals, gathered food, and brought clean water. Daniel rested, his strength slowly returning. She slept beside him every night, guarding him like a silent protector. Then came the final test. On the 5th day, just before dawn, Rava's ears shot up. She growled, low and sharp. Daniel sat up, fast. "Is it them?" She nodded. They had been found. Daniel struggled to stand, but Rava stepped in front of him, shaking her head. She motioned for him to hide behind the rocks. "No," Daniel said, his voice rough. "We run together." But she shook her head again. Then in a soft voice she said, "You stay. I go." His heart dropped. "You're not leaving me." She looked at him, eyes full of sadness. "They want me, not you." Daniel stepped closer. "Rava, you're not alone anymore. I don't care what they want." She looked like she might argue, but instead, she wrapped her arms around him. It was the first time she'd ever hugged him. Tears stung his eyes as he hugged her back, holding her tight. She trembled but didn't let go, and he whispered, "I'm never letting you go. If we run together. If we fight together." Rava pulled back. For the first time, she looked at him not as a stranger, but as family. They ran again, but this time not as hunter and prey. They ran as a pair, as partners. When the hunters arrived in the clearing, They found only footprints and broken vines. The two had vanished. Weeks later, far away on a distant moon in a small new home near the edge of a human outpost, a man and a Wolfgirl stood under the stars. Daniel worked on a small garden, while Rava sat nearby, her tail swaying slowly, her golden eyes scanning the sky. She was safe now and she wasn't alone, not anymore.